28 days earlier, he had been seized by Border Patrol in the Sonoran Desert, only to be swept into a criminal justice system designed to put men like Manuel behind bars. Not only was he sentenced to nearly a month in detention for illegal re-entry, Manuel was forever marked as a felon, a label that will prevent him from holding any legal status in this country. But what troubled Manuel was not the loss of hope for his legal status, but the fact that his wife and 3 young children had spent the last month without a source of income, father or husband, in their home of Chicago.
On May 21st, we, along with 9 other women students, embarked on a 2-week expedition to learn about the political, economic, environmental, and other social issues entrenched into the southwest borderlands. We traveled through the border towns on both the Mexico and Arizona sides and met with community members and leaders, human rights activists, enforcement officials, attorneys, and the migrants themselves. Border policy, we learned, is horrifying, both in its emotional toll and its financial cost. This cost, however, is not some accident of the system. U.S. border policy isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed, to discourage crossing into the United States and to make it as difficult as possible. In 1993, Border Patrol Sector Chief Sylvester Reyes in El Paso, Texas, introduced Operation Hold the Line. The strategy focused enforcement resources in urban areas so that migrants would be forced to cross the border through the deserts of rural Texas instead. At the other end of the border, in San Diego, California, Operation Gatekeeper aimed to accomplish the same, to close the border within the city and thereby push migrants into the desert. This policy creates a kind of funnel where migrants are pushed across through the rugged mountains and the winding canyons of the Tucson sector. During summer days, the heat climbs to 115 degrees or more. During winter nights, temperatures drop to hypothermic lows. Crossing on foot, it is physically impossible to carry enough water to stay hydrated. Navigation through the twisting washes and valleys is prohibitively difficult without a guide. The remains of some 6,000 migrants dead from exposure have been given to the Arizona Recovered Human Remains Project since the birth of modern border policy in the mid-1990s. Creeping militarization has shaped both the training of the Border Patrol and the tools that they use. Military technology, repurposed for border security after its use in Afghanistan and Iraq, is near ubiquitous on the border. Automated drones scour the desert floor from thousands of feet up. Huge surveillance blimps serve as additional eyes and hang in the air as potent psychological symbols of the Border Patrol's presence. Mobile security systems trucks are like cherry pickers equipped with cameras. With their platforms extended, they can see for some 10 miles around. As conflicts in the Middle East wind down, Customs and Border Protection is poised to become the next major client of military-industrial giants, such as Lockheed Martin. Securing our borders runs against patterns of north-south migration that have been ongoing for thousands of years. For much of the past century and a half, seasonal migration has cycled workers from the communities of northern Mexico to the labor-intensive agriculture of the West and back again. For years, this movement was unimpeded by tight border enforcement. Now, border policy strives to seal off patterns of migration that are firmly historical and arguably inevitable. Consequences have been disastrous.
In 2005, the Department of Homeland Security implemented Operation Streamline as a way to close down the border via the criminal justice system. Prior to 2005, immigration via the southwestern border and overstayed visas were classified as civil issues, and so all proceedings went through civil administrative courts. Following the movement towards border militarization, the 2000s saw the act of crossing the border become criminalized. Once returned directly to the Mexican side of the border, those apprehended are now charged with a criminal felony. But the streamlined process is unique and unprecedented in that it tries migrants en masse. In the Tucson courtroom, we watched as 70 men and women were escorted by plaintiffs and Border Patrol agents, bound with chains at their feet, waist, and hands. What does it mean for 70 people to be convicted as felons in the course of 45 minutes? Swept under the guise of efficiency, due process and criminal rights are all but scrapped. Each defendant is allowed no more than 20 minutes with an attorney. This is especially ironic since our group met with one of the only public defenders for nearly 2 hours. What worries these legal experts in Tucson more than anything is the precedence it sets for mass trials as the norm in all branches of the justice system. The immigration bill debated this summer would triple the capacity of defendants in a given case from 70 to 210. We are now back at Whitman, and as we readjust into our surrounding community, our border trip group continues to challenge the distance we have placed between ourselves and the reality we witness on the borderlands. The border is far from secure. If we accept the wall as a way to increase security, then we must grapple with the financial, emotional, and social consequences of our so-called security policies. Neither reversing the trend of border militarization nor calming our fear for others will be easy, but they are nonetheless feats that must be accomplished to preserve the integrity of our communities and ourselves.
She will cover you with her mantle everywhere you go. Her shawl will shade you when you are walking in the seared desert, your heart pounding loud in your ears, and your feet driving from exhaustion. During the night, when temperatures drop close to zero, she will warm you. La Virgen de Guadalupe te protegerá, hijo. The Virgin of Guadalupe will protect you, my son. These are the words ringing in your ears, words from your mother, words that you pray will hold true. You pray over and over the one simple prayer your mind can summon as you crouch under a mesquite bush, waiting for a sign from the coyote that the border patrol truck is safely out of sight, and you can resume your walking. You clutch the print of the Virgen de Guadalupe that your mother gave you after she gave you her blessing so that the Virgen will protect you from your journey from Zamora, Michoacan to Los Angeles, California, where your wife and kids live as U.S. citizens. Your two daughters, Dulce and Cecilia, are your pride and joy. You can almost feel their tiny arms wrapped around you and hear them saying, "You're back, Daddy, you're back." The memory of your girls gives you the strength to endure the harsh desert conditions and to try to cross the border no matter what the consequences might be. You begin to think about your aging father that can no longer work the land because your mother's diabetes has deteriorated her health to the point that she can no longer see. Her medicine is getting more and more expensive. Your father can't cover the costs, and he can't even get a job at one of the many maquiladoras in Zamora because he is too old and not a single corporation will hire him, a man in his 60s, while they can hire a young teenager that dropped out of school. You don't want to leave your parents to their fate, but you have no choice because you have your own family to look after. You turn the print of the Virgen de Guadalupe over in your hand and see that on the reverse side there is a calendar from 2009 advertising your favorite restaurant in Zamora called La Bandera Rosa, where they make tortillas recién hechas a mano, homemade, like the ones your mom used to make when she still had her sight. You keep looking at the calendar and the date April 30th, 2009 is screaming at you. That was the day everything changed for you. That was the day you were convicted as a felon. That was the day you became a criminal under Operation Streamline because you re-entered the U.S. after being deported once before. That was the day you lost even the slightest chance of getting permanent residency through your wife, who was a U.S. citizen. Yet here you are, 2013, in the hot and dry Arizona desert, under the blazing sun, suddenly springing to your feet and running as fast as you can, away from your hiding spot and away from the screams of the other migrants in your group that have been caught by the Border Patrol and are being thrown in the back of their high-tech vehicles. In your haste, you don't notice that the print of the Virgen de Guadalupe slipped from your fingers and fell onto the burning Arizona soil. Here you are, running for your life. And here I am, reaching down to pick up a worn-out print of the Virgen de Guadalupe, wondering who it belonged to.
In 1994, the Border Patrol unveiled its new strategy of prevention through deterrence, explicitly designed to increase the cost and danger of crossing the border by steering migrants into harsh desert terrain. Since then, the number of migrants dying while crossing the border every year has quintupled. In Arizona, deaths went from 5 to 10 per year in the early 90s to 150 to 200 through the 2000s.
Dennis Baroni sits on his worn Adirondack chair as we crowd around him, fighting to find spots in the shade of the porch. We've been traveling for the past 5 days, so there's something comforting about the Maroney's stunning, straight-out-of-Sunset magazine ranch house, a bright oasis in the otherwise desolate desert. Maroney ranches cattle, the picture of every country music-loving, Western dreaming, urban girl's imagination. He's dressed in denim, boots, and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat. 18 miles from the border wall, Maroney's property lies right about where migrants crossing into the U.S. begin dropping their belongings. A ripped rain poncho, a discarded backpack full of extra clothes and tortilla cloths, an empty can of beans scraped clean by hungry hands. His wife used to offer food and water to those passing through, and at times the amount of traffic became overwhelming. He often wakes up to holes snipped in his fences, and more than once someone has tampered with his irrigation. To be honest, he tells us, the disruptions can be deadly to his cattle. Young calves step in discarded cans that form thick molds around their hooves, as slowly and painfully suffocating their feet as they grow. Others graze on the leftover trash, ingesting enough plastic that it forms thick balls that rip apart their stomach. It would be easy for Maroney to blame migrants for the damage to his property and cows. This is a person who is directly affected by migrants crossing the border every day. But he also knows that the damage to his cows isn't really a result of migrant traffic. In Maroney's mind, the problem that comes with living in the borderlands are a direct consequence of U.S. immigration policy. Increased border security has only led to increased insecurity in his own backyard. Does security mean drone flights passing above daily, armed and inexperienced Border Patrol agents guarding the area by taking naps on the side of the road, migrants near death passing through his land? When asked what he sees as a secure border, Maroney describes a different vision, a more open policy where people are allowed to cross in both directions. Maroney's explanation of the border, as laid out to us as we snack on a lunch of tacos and juice boxes, highlights the complex realities of living in the borderlands. Maroney's vision of a secure border doesn't end at a safer grazing for his cattle. Not only would he like the chance to work with Mexican ranchers just across the wall, trading advice that could benefit them both, but he would like to see those who live or pass through the borderlands feel more secure. As a U.S. citizen, he sees protecting the rights of migrants as a simple moral obligation. In a region where people both celebrate the combination of two cultures, while others simultaneously create a barrier to block them from each other, it's impossible to not see or feel the effect of U.S. border policy. By expanding his notion of security to encompass all those affected by the border wall, Maroney emphasized the need for our country to reevaluate our understanding of what it means to live in a place characterized by the barrier that runs through it.
In 2005, the Real ID Act suspended the following 37 federal laws in order to make way for the expansion of the border wall.
National Environmental Policy Act.
Endangered Species Act.
Clean Water Act.
National Historic Preservation Act.
Migratory Bird Treaty Act.
Clean Air Act. Archaeological Resource Protection Act.
The Safe Drinking Water Act.
The Noise Control Act.
The Solid Waste Disposal Act. The Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. Archaeological and Historic Preservation Act.
Antiquities Act.
Historic Sites, Buildings, and Antiquities Act.
The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act.
Farmland Protection Policy Act. Coastal Zone Management Act.
The Wilderness Act.
The Federal Land and Policy Management Act.
National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act. Fish and Wildlife Act of 1965. Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act.
Administrative Procedure Act.
Otay Mountain Wilderness Act of 1999.
California Desert Protection Act.
National Park Service Organic Act. National Park Service General Authorities Act.
National Parks and Recreation Act of 1978.
The Arizona Desert Wilderness Act.
The Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. Equal Protection Act. Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act.
American Indian Religious Freedom Act.
Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
National Forest Management Act of 1976.
Multiple Use and Sustained Yield Act of 1960. Federal Granting Cooperative Agreement Act of 1977.
I met a man named Victor in Mexico. His dark hair was cropped tightly, and his mustache was thin and well groomed. He occasionally twisted the end of his mustache, out of nervousness or habit, it's hard to say. As we talked, he often showed off his easy smile, which revealed 2 rows of uneven teeth. The smile disappeared when I asked him how he came to be here, at a migrant shelter in Nogales, Mexico. I got arrested, he said with finality, as if this explained everything. We probed him a little bit further, and his vanishing smile made a world of sense. Victor lived in Chandler, Arizona for his entire life. He came to the United States from Mexico 22 years ago, carried across the border by his mother when he was just 3 months old. He provided for his mother and his 2 younger siblings, had a good job, bought his family a house. Then he made a mistake. Drinking and driving, a DUI, getting arrested and hauled to the police station, where it was quickly discovered his papers were fake. He was deported to Nogales the next day. He attempted to cross the border to the US, but he was caught. Back to Nogales, one more try to cross the border, but he was caught again. I had no choice, Victor said. I had to get back to my family. He was charged with felony reentry and spent 3 months in prison. With this charge on his record, he has practically zero chance to ever qualify for legal status in the US. I don't feel at home in Mexico, he said. I've always lived in the United States. I don't speak Spanish well. Next to Victor was a young woman named Catalina. He had met her at dinner the previous night. She didn't speak English. She did occasionally favor us with a smile, but I couldn't help but notice that the smile never reached her eyes. We asked her what she was from. Southern Mexico, came the terse reply. Later, my friend and translator Leslie would guess she was actually from El Salvador. Central American refugees are often vague with information about where they come from. Technically, the migrant shelters are for Mexican citizens only. Catalina had never been to the United States. She was caught with the searchlight of a Border Patrol helicopter while attempting to cross with 4 other women. They had seen lights in the distance and thought it was a city, but it was a Border Patrol station. Their coyote, their guide, had fled and they had tried to run. Catalina pulled up her right pant leg and showed us a cluster of recently healed wounds on her knee, shin, and ankle. Cactus, she said. I fell. She was apprehended and spent 30 days in prison. As we continued to talk, Catalina opened up. She spoke of her young son, who she had left with her mother while trying to go find work in the US. She hadn't heard from either of them since. I asked them both now, where will you go from here? While Victor paused, Catalina waited for Leslie's translation patiently. Her answer was immediate. I'm going home. She said crossing the border was too hard. We turned to Victor expectantly and saw a devilish grin play about his lips. Yo me voy a donde ella se va, he said. I'm going wherever she goes. Catalina gasped and punched him, giggling. Victor playfully winced at her blows and grinned at me with those crooked teeth. But Victor was not going where Catalina was going. Later, he told us he intended to cross the border again soon. He missed his family. If he didn't get back to work soon, they would lose the house he bought for them. His life is in the US, just like mine is. It occurred to me suddenly that he'd lived there longer than I had. Catalina and Victor were being pulled apart by the same set of circumstances that brought them together. By now, Victor is either safely in the US, with his family, or in prison again, missing his family more than ever.